Welcome to our latest episode, episode 3 of Tools for Liberty. We are filming again at Trinity Church of the Nazarene, and I am Amanda Sparrow, and this is Dylan Proctor.
All right, so today we're going to be talking about a few different things. We're going to be talking about chaos bait, we're going to be talking about identity, and then we're going to be talking about the new Doctor Who. So that's our trajectory for today. So let's go ahead and talk about the term chaos bait. So this actually came up this week when a couple of things that happened in our world. I realized that there's some things which go on, and really the culture as they shape around different events just turns into chaos, and things happen, and it's just like it's bait for chaos because people aren't talking on the same terms. So what we're talking about when we say chaos bait is kind of like clickbait, where something's out there to get people's attention, but instead of just getting people to click or give attention to something, chaos bait is something which just is out there, and it's bait for chaos. It just causes things to all fall apart.
All right, so we'll be using that term throughout our conversation and with some other things that we talk about. So our main topic is identity, and we're going to explore that. We've decided to do this episode on identity because we've realized just how important it is and how our society looks at it. And we come with different terms and we talk about it differently, and there's different philosophies on how we have identity, how we develop our identity, and there's lots of different voices and perspectives, and often when we come and have this conversation, it's not logically based or in any way of trying to hear out people who are speaking, but it's really just kind of, again, it's just more chaos. And so we do want to talk about this in a logical and encouraging way.
Yeah, so one of the reasons why we want to talk about identity today is because it's something which so defines the world around us. People are so fixated on who they are, how they identify, and stuff like that, and people have seemingly forgot what it even means to be a constructive person in society. They've forgotten how to relate to the world around us. We've become so wrapped up in our personal identity that we've forgotten what it means to be quality people, and we see this all throughout our culture, whether we look at writing and things that go on, whether it be in Hollywood, television. We see where people are trying to write something around an identity, and people are doing things which is based around an identity, and we have identity politics which people ascribe to, and it's one of these things which is really terrible in our culture, where people get more fixated on their personal identity than developing into someone who actually does something meaningful, and where their identity is broader than just some sort of superficial qualifiers attached to a person. And in our culture, so many people want to ascribe to sort of a collective identity, which is what we talked about in sort of the episode 1 of here. And if I've said it once, I've said it many times, but there is no liberty when your rewards and penalties are based on which group identity you belong to. There's only liberty when you as an individual have rewards and penalties based on who you are as an individual person.
And so kind of building off of that, as we're talking about developing our identity, we're also talking about actualization. And so that is developing into that sense of who we are and who we are supposed to be. And so we can have kind of either two options, and it is either a self-centered actualization or an actualization in our world. And we want to be careful when we describe this, because when we say actualization in our world, we are not talking about going back into this idea where our whole self is absorbed into some kind of group, or where our consequences are dependent upon the group. That's not what we're saying. What we're talking about when we say an actualization in our world is that as we have developed, as we grow, as we learn what is good and proper behavior, as we learn to communicate, we do not demand the world to change for our benefit, but we look and see how we can best fit in the world. And this is a movement, as you can think to our last episode that talked about a movement towards righteousness, where everything is in right order, is that we are looking at how we can become the person we are to be, or who we are supposed to be, that moves ourselves and the world and community and the life around us back into right order. Versus a self-centered actualization really is selfishness. And it is saying, if I just dig deep enough within myself, then I'm going to find comfort, I'm going to find wholeness, I'm going to find completeness. And in that, we actually find that we are destructive, not only to ourselves, but to the world around us.
Yeah, and I think Amanda's really onto something. If we only look to find our identity within ourselves, we say, well, what color am I? What am I in sort of this, or this? We forget that who we are is someone who has to interact with the world around us. And so she kind of talked about the idea of self-centered actualization, how we truly find out who we are as a person. But I want to challenge us to think that we should actualize not as just somebody looking to the core of ourselves, but looking at the world around us, because one of the most important things we do as people is we negotiate with the world around us. We negotiate with other human beings, we negotiate with our environment, we negotiate with so many things, and it's so important that we as people, we learn how to interact with the environment around us. Whenever things go wrong in our life, we can't just sit down and say everything in the world is at fault. We ourselves, we have to figure out how to interact with the world in a healthy way. We have to figure out how to be somebody who has a great personality, who has good characteristics, who has traits that are useful in the world around us as well as desirable. When we want to have healthy interactions and relationships with people, we have to be something that says we ourselves are willing to interact with other people in a healthy way, that says we don't want to just be someone who forces other people to accept everything about us, when in reality we need to make sure that we are people who are, in a sense, worth accepting. We don't want to just people who are antisocial, people who are violent, people who do things which are destructive. We want to be people who are reasonable, rational people who go out and are healthy for the world around us. And we say we want to negotiate with the world. We want to be constructive. We want to be meaningful. We want to interact with other people in a very healthy and productive way in society.
And so as we continue on in negotiation, there is a need for dialogue, and I think often, again, referencing something we said at the beginning of the episode, it becomes difficult to dialogue because identity is such a personal issue. We make it so emotional, and we can't have a true dialogue because if anyone says anything that even remotely seems like it offends us, we immediately shut down or we lash out. And so we need to have appropriate dialogue and debate and discussion, and to discuss it and really learn from each other, because each individual is going to have a slightly different identity, a slightly different perspective, and for us to truly learn, we have to listen. And I'm not saying we have to accept everything everyone else says, but we do have to learn to hear and to talk. And also, often in these conversations, we prescribe motives without actually listening to what people are saying. Mm-hmm. Like, oh, you said something that I disagree with, and you said it because you hate me or because you want to hurt me. Mm-hmm. And we have to be careful, and we have to hear and listen for the people who just maybe disagree with us, but who are trying to learn and better themselves just as we are, and to listen and then to truly decide, as they describe their motives and their language and the words and how they define them and how they use them, if they're trying to be helpful or hurtful, instead of us just off the top deciding for them. And so as we continue this conversation, again, as with all these episodes, we wish that you would take this as you watch it, that it would begin a conversation with yourself and with others around you outside of just the medium of this video or Facebook or YouTube or however this is posted. And that you would take these principles and put them into your own life. And when you come up to people who are trying to decide, what does it mean for me to be me? Or who am I, or who is that person in the larger scheme of this life, this world, this community, that we can sit down and we can talk with one another honestly and compassionately.
Yep, and the final thought, if you take anything away from this section of the video, and really this video in the whole, learn to negotiate with the world around us. As we develop our personal identity, learn to negotiate with the world around us. The world is not going to conform to every single attribute we have. We learn to even basic things like speaking in an appropriate volume. We have to learn to be people who interact and negotiate with the world in a very meaningful way. And actually, we're about to go into sort of our current cultural topic, which really segues into this idea of identity. And, one of the issues that I've seen in the idea of identity is it seems that people aren't even speaking the same language. Like, one person will say something and another person will respond back, and they create like a straw man. They pretend the other person said something, and people aren't even talking the same language. They may look like they're both speaking English, but they're not responding back as if they heard what the other person said, and there's no real dialogue. And people, they say they want dialogue and discussion, but then they use buzzwords and things which shut down dialogue and discussion. So let's move into our cultural perspective. And Amanda, what is the current cultural issue we're going to talk about today?
All right, so today, which really, like you said, deals well with identity, we're going to talk about the new Doctor who was just announced, I think last week, for the show Doctor Who. If you're not familiar with the show, it is a sci-fi series, and one of the geniuses of it is every time they get a new actor, it is simply the Doctor regenerating into a new person of the Doctor's self. And the new Doctor is now an actress whose name has just escaped me. Can you?
Jodie Whittaker.
Jodie Whittaker. And what has become significant about this is that it is a female who's taking on the role of the Doctor versus a male. And it has caused some great stirring and chaos, and to an extent has become chaos bait in our world today. And there's a lot of people who are saying really different things about why they like or don't like the new actress who's taking up this role. And it's all kind of, media and the world has kind of boiled it down to either you are against women or for women. And so we wanted to talk about the identity, and the Doctor's identity is often odd and strange because who the Doctor is. And so it just becomes even more now, I guess, politically charged with it being a female doctor.
It does, and that's the thing that really bothers me about it is, to Amanda's point, when we had a conversation about this earlier in the week, she said, I hear a lot of people who are saying, and I've read articles about this where people are just upset and they're saying they're defending the fact that it's a woman when there's not actually a lot of people being upset that it's a woman for the sake of it being a woman. And this is what I'm talking about, how people speak different language. There are people who come out and they really create a straw man of saying everybody hates it because it's a woman, when really all the legitimate opposition that I've seen to it is because they don't like it becoming an ideologically motivated thing. Which I know with myself personally, I really don't care if the doctor is a man or a woman. I think as long as there's good quality writing, then it's going to be fine. But the thing that worries me about it is when I look at the language that the people writing the show and a lot of the culture around it, is it seems, and even some of the stuff within previous episodes, it seems like an ideological move where it's a political agenda as opposed to it just being something which happens by happenstance. And this is one of the things which really bothers me about the broader picture of identity, is people start taking identity and using it for political gain, and then they use chaos bait to put people pitted against one another, because people who may be excited about it, whether they like Jodie Whittaker, they just love Doctor Who, and they maybe they want a female doctor, and they see it and they say, well, you're mad because it's a female doctor, when other people are like, no, we don't like it because it's a politically motivated thing. But all that one side hears is that you don't like women, like what Amanda said, is people, they paint it into you either for women or you just hate women, which is either intellectually dishonest or intellectually deficient when people do that. But Amanda's seen that very quickly, that it was chaos bait for that sort of argument. And then people on the other side are they're thrown in the chaos where they're like, well, I don't really know how to articulate myself without sounding like a troll on the internet. And the internet trolls do emerge, and they do come out and do things. And so it's really hard for there to be a constructive discussion about it. And my conclusion when I look at it is all the discussion completely moves away from whether or not Doctor Who is a good show. It turns into what is going on in terms of identity, and it turns of politics, and it's completely away from is this a good TV show, a science fiction TV show about somebody traveling in a police box throughout time fighting Daleks and whatnot. And that's what really bothers me is the chaos bait takes it away from what stuff really is. And we see this happening in culture, surrounded by identity all the time.
Yeah, and I think that's what the really sad thing. So every time the Doctor regenerates, there's all the ways to people who are crying because the Doctor they loved is leaving, and there's people excited because a new Doctor's coming, or they're crying because it wasn't exactly the right person they wanted to fulfill in the role of the new Doctor. And it's part of the culture of Doctor Who, and there's some excitement even in the midst of the conversation. And we really weren't able to enjoy that with this new revelation of the Doctor because it was so politically charged. Yeah. You couldn't enjoy Doctor Who because you were too busy navigating the kind of the sifting sand that is politics, and so that's why we wanted to have this conversation, and also why Doctor Who really fit into the conversation as our current issue, because the idea of identity is serious, and there's lots of people dealing quite deeply with what it means to be themselves, and it's a serious issue, and we cannot trivialize it and kind of put up all our hopes and dreams into a TV show, and so, or to make that kind of the poster for the conversation of identity, we've cheapened a very serious conversation that needs to happen. I mean, it's a good show and we love it, but in the end, it is a TV show, and we hope it does inspire us to be good people and the kind of adventures and to be the Doctor. But it will not, one way or other, I think, define us all within itself. Yeah. And so, as we talk about whether it is the new Doctor, the actress, or later on the actor, or whoever else may take up this role in years to come, or whoever has done it in the past. What we really have to be sure of is when we sit down and we talk to one another is about who makes you, and how do you actualize, and how do you navigate the world in which you live in, that it is a conversation that needs lots of compassion, lots of understanding, and that doesn't mean we can't be logically rigorous and hold people to a good and productive and righteous standard, but we have to be willing to hear and to listen and not just immediately to throw ourselves into chaos. And so I don't know, we are both, I think, very much Doctor Who fans, and we are looking forward to the new season, but we do hope that as time goes by, we will find a good, well-written, developed show and not just more political meandering. Yeah, and the political meandering is really upsets me. And we could probably do a whole episode on the political meandering of Doctor Who. But back to the broader theme of identity, because this
is really a boiling point I see in our culture, the idea of identity. And Doctor Who has brought this to the thing. And what's so sad is all the discussion, none of it is about anything within the Doctor Who universe. It's all the political reality around it. And it really bothers me that even something which is so, I don't want to say culturally sacred, but something which has just been a cultural, enjoyment for people for so long. People have been really wrapped up in that for so long, and now it seems to be ripped from people who, something which is generally innocent, you could say, in culture.
Yeah.
It's something which, you go home, you sit on your couch, you watch TV, maybe you're going to power watch Doctor Who for like 12 hours, or something like that, which people do. And then now when you want to just go and watch that and be at your home and sort of have peace for a little while, now you're wrapped up in this cultural drama where there's all these people creating straw mans, people on both sides just at odds with one another, and there's no healthy interaction between the two. And one more thought, and I'll let Amanda respond to this in closing. Of course, we are clergy, both of us, and it is important to point back to how identity is shaped in the kingdom of God. And one of the things I'd like to point out, I know I've been talking about a lot about this at my parish over in Jolton, but the idea that when people come into the kingdom of God, their identity was to change. And the whole idea of being born again, a lot of times we think of this being a very spiritual thing. Even though when we first see this being introduced with the character Nicodemus, he's perplexed because of the very literal side of it, not the spiritual side of it. But he says, how do people be born again? And in our world, people are so often defined by the things in the cosmos which we are born into, whether it be who you're born into, what family you're born into, what, in the ancient world it mattered what order you were born. People's birth situation in the cosmos so develops who people are. And it's beyond their control. But in the kingdom of God, your identity was no longer what circumstances you were born into. It was when you took your free will and you, as a medium to accept the salvation in the kingdom, you could become somebody new. And in the kingdom of God, for the last 2,000 years, after the coming of Christ, as people became followers of Christ, they could become someone new. And their identity was no longer the things which the world would want to paint on them. And if there's ever a time where people need to be able to have a new identity that says it's not whatever the world wants to just throw on you, all the guilt, all the reward and penalties that the world wants to place on you based on your, born into identity, which you have no control over. It's just a random, uncontrollable thing in the cosmos, who you're born as. But in the kingdom of God, you have a new liberty and a new prosperity when you're born again and you become somebody new. It's a literal sort of rebirth. Your identity is now new. Your past, born, birth circumstances, all that's irrelevant. Doesn't matter. And then you knew.
I think that is the beauty of the gospel. And again, we've talked about it on other episodes, and we've touched it about Jesus going, and then later, after he ascends up to heaven and sends the Holy Spirit, he sends out Peter. I know you've been doing a series in John, and we have at Trinity been doing a series in the Acts. And recently we just did the story of Peter and Cornelius, and it's really, again, Jesus continually redefining identity. And Peter's like, well, no, that's the unclean, or that's the unworthy, or that's the untouchable. And Jesus is like, you've missed it. It's not, being a participant in the kingdom is not about who you were or what your society says you were, but it really is, are you willing to be transformed by the power of the Spirit and to be a productive and righteous person in your community? And so this is something, if that is what defines us as who we are, if we actualize as in how we are to participate in the life of the church and the life of the kingdom of God, then we're going to find our identity is not as muddled. And we're going to come to, I think, places in our lives where we're going to have hard times in understanding who we are and how we interact. But we're going to find strength and comfort and grace in our God that we're not going to find if we rely on some of these political or social constructs that says, well, you're this because you were born like this. You have to act like A because you were born into a group of A's, or whatever the category is. And so we do find freedom in the kingdom of God to be actualized as human beings who are created for a purpose, and that purpose is righteousness and love. And hopefully then in that we do not get overwhelmed with all the chaos fate because we know peace. So that is our discussion on identity. Again, we hope that this is helpful for you, and that will be encouraging that you can continue this conversation in your own communities, and that we can all be encouraged and more knowledgeable. Thank you for watching.